Sportsbook Hotline by our friend Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. BC, how you doing this morning?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys?
Good. We are doing well. We played that clip of Tony White as we were bringing you in here, talking about how he didn't put guys in a position to do the things and play the way he's asked them to in terms of playing loose and free and unleashed. What did you make of that comment? Do you think it's just, I know from a layman's point of view, I hear it and think, he wanted to send more pressure over to the quarterback. He wanted to be more aggressive in terms of his pressure packages. Is it just that, or do you think there's other things involved when he takes an answer like that?
I think it's a guy giving himself just a really tough critique, and wanting to hold himself to a high standard, just like they're talking about this defense being to a certain level. And I'm sure there are 2 or 3 plays. I don't know that he ever mentioned specifically what they were. That would have been interesting, like which plays. He might not have wanted to give that away. But those specific plays would have added some context to that. But I'm sure every week there's going to be, especially in a game where you come up 3 points short, there's going to be a handful of plays where you look back and you say, yeah, I should have done this differently as a coach, just like a player is saying that. And I think that's what that was about. Like, I can think of specific examples in that game where it shines light on just how thin of a margin this defense has. Not because they're really good, but I'm saying the thin a margin they have because the offense isn't scoring many points and the special teams has kind of been average. So they have to be on all the time. And if they have one little slip up and give up a few points here or there, it could end up being a loss. And one of those plays was the drive when it was 10-10, and there was that 3rd and 11 on about the 45-yard line, and they completed a 14-yard pass. Defense played pretty well on that series. They almost stopped them on 4th and 1. They had them 3rd and 11. They gave up one pass, and yet Michigan State kicked a 52-yard field goal, and that sort of ended up being the tilter. And I think it's that kind of stuff we're talking about here, where this defense knows they've got to just be like dynamite in those moments, because even if you give up that 1 3rd and 11, it's just one play, but it could end up being whether you're sad or happy when you wake up Sunday morning.
BC, the other point of interest for me was when Coach White brought up the takeaways yesterday and how they come in waves. And, I presented this question to Ravi earlier this morning, and I'm curious on what you think too. How often is this defense in position for a takeaway? And is that the potential of why the Huskers are, short in the takeaway department? Because I ran down the stats and, they excel in almost everything. Total defense, 16th, first downs allowed 12. They are 13th in sacks. They're 30th in passing efficiency defense. And then I brought up Georgia's turnover gained mark, and that's at 11. Nebraska's is at 10. So are we only bringing up the takeaways because that's like the last piece to make this defense go from good to elite? Or are they just actually not in position for a lot of takeaways?
No, I think they are in position to have more than they've had. Like, I think there was 1 or 2 they could have had this last Saturday, and Rule even brought a couple of them up. That's interesting, the point you make. I think sometimes when people think of like just those ultra great defenses, they do think of that squad that just takes it away like 2 or 3 times a game. I always think of Bear. It's because I'm an NFC North guy. I always think of like Bears teams when they didn't have a quarterback, but occasionally they'd have a year, where they took the ball away like 3 or 4 times a game, and you're like, "What the stink?" As a Vikings fan.
Sounds a lot like 2018 or 17 when they had Trubisky.
But I think it's stuff like that people get in their head, sort of, where you have those certain defenses you remember. Like Bo Pelini's first defenses, those of a certain age. We're starting to get long enough in time where some people aren't even going to remember when Bo was the defensive
coordinator. 03 when they had 25 interceptions.
Yeah, that's 20 years ago. It's sad. But when he was the D coordinator, I mean, Bullock's brother had as many turnovers as Nebraska has right now, it feels like. And so I think that's what gets in people's head. I do think they're in position, though, Andrew, because I don't think some of the other stuff comes out in the numbers the way they do, and they tackle really well. and maybe there's some technique and punching it out that they could do a little bit differently. But there's just been a few where they've had their hands on the football, and that guy's got to sort of make that extraordinary play. And I think it's being critiqued like this because the margin for error for this team is so small, and the other side of the ball is, not scoring a lot. And so you've got to be special. They will have to be that to win a couple of these games down the stretch, because Iowa's going to come in here and try to take it away 3 or 4 times. So this defense has to sort of match that and be that kind of crew.
BC, I'm curious, we've been talking a lot about the defense and Tony White. What did you think of the comments made by Satterfield in terms of Heinrich Haarberg and his, just start running through people's faces again? Like, what did you, to me, I kind of just took that as like, hey, you're overthinking, you need to start kind of playing more instinctually, which I think is accurate. I don't know what you think. It looked like you could physically see the wheels turning in his head on Saturday, which is generally not great as a quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's what that's all about. There was a couple plays where in the pocket especially, you could see like he was actually like processing it in real time, like more than you want from a QB.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's caught in a weird spot now. And I do think they've explained it correctly. They're right. Like a lot of times we have seen when we watch football, there's that QB who comes on the scene the first week. There's not a lot of pressure, right? It's like, oh, how much does he really know anyway? And he goes and he does some stuff and people are kind of fired up about it. But then as he's played a few games, there's more data in his head. He's accumulated more information. He's like, oh, this works, that doesn't work. And you start to think about it while you're going sometimes. And Heinrich, if you listen to him talk to the media, he's a very thoughtful guy. Like you can tell he is an analytical guy and a guy who really likes to process things thoroughly and all that stuff. And he says sometimes that can be damaging to me as a player. And so I think they're just trying to get him to be like, be that Heinrich kind of off the bat. Yeah, you've picked some stuff up and you want to process it as best you can as it goes, but also don't be hesitant out there. Just be that guy who the first week was like, I'm going to run through that safety and make him hurt more than he's going to hurt me. And because that's your biggest asset right now. So I think they're trying to get him to lean into that.
BC, speaking of Haarberg, I was thinking about this when I was listening to him talk yesterday, that, it seems like he's got the personality to get over things quickly, but will that mindset translate to the field come Saturday? Do you like how he's carried himself this week off the loss?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's just a guy, he cares so much about his craft and his team. And there's no easy way to go in and talk to the media about a play you thought was a dumb play you made. And he used that phrase at one point, a dumb throw. What happened. Everybody saw the stuff on tape that maybe could have been there. There's some stuff we don't understand too. Like, on the one he had to Alex Bullock, for instance, where early in the game where it could have been a long touchdown ends up being an easy pick for the safety at the 4-yard line. That was obviously a bad throw by him. But it was interesting hearing him explain his process of what was in his mind. He knew it was bad when he let it go, but also that had been where the ball had gone on that play in practices and everything he had repped, and the guy fell down, so he needed to adjust on the fly. So I think it's some stuff like that, where the play kind of takes on a little bit of a different shape maybe than it did on Tuesday or whatever. And he's got to get to that point where he can that quickly without overthinking it, still react to it and be like, no, this is how I got to make that throw. Boom. And it's got to be just like that. And that's why quarterback is such a tough position, because think about it. You rep something, you do it a certain way. You're like, this is where the ball's supposed to go. And then all of a sudden in 1 to 2 seconds, you need to process, nope, ball's not going there. It's got to go over here on this play. And so it's a challenge, but I do think he's got a good mentality. I think he's a guy who can be coached hard. I think he doesn't mind like Matt Rule and Marcus Satterfield getting after him on a Saturday, and he takes it and goes with it. So that part doesn't bother me. It's just a matter of over the next few games, how much can he grow as a passer in sort of seeing the field. And it's such a tough thing to do. So whether he can or not. If he does, give him a lot of kudos, because it's not an easy step to take, I don't think, for a player.
So BC, there's a couple different things I think with Harburg that are happening at the same time, and we've touched a lot on the decision making part of it, but I think there's also just an accuracy portion of it as well, where we see a lot of the balls come out high or inaccurately down the field. How much of that do you think is correctable in season? Because it does seem like sometimes when he lets go, he's not, whether it's, his elbow dips a little bit and his arm angle's a little goofy sometimes. Like, how much of that do you think is correctable in season?
Yeah, I mean, you're working with what his sort of technique is for the rest of the year. I mean, you're not going to change anything like that on the fly. So it's a good question, Rob. I mean, it's just got to be a deal where he himself is a little better, and that there's no other way to put it. Like, if you go back to the Michigan game, that was his best passing performance to me, like for 3 quarters. If I think he was like 10 of 12 or something at one point. It kind of faded off at the end, and his stat line didn't look as good. But I remember looking down at 3 quarters, and it felt like there was some precision, and he was really confident in some of his throws. And he has those that he's put on film, like even this past Saturday, that one he hit the Betts on the run from deep in Nebraska territory, where Betts almost housed it. It would have been a 90-yard play or something, ended up being like 30 or 40.
Or you mean
what's that?
You mean Coleman?
Yeah, Coleman. I'm Betts.
It's the 15 that's throwing you off. I understand.
Yeah, no. Coleman on the run. That was a beautiful ball, and he's had a few of those throws where you're like, okay, you've got it in you. I think it really comes down to hitting those layups, though. Like the play where he tried to force it into Jaden Dawson, there was like 3 guys around him. That's where he's got to see the progression of the field within his offense and realize on most plays, Coleman was coming across, and that there's a little 5-yard pass he could have flipped to him, and Coleman runs for 20 plus yards. So there were like 4 or 5 of those kind of plays that were just missed on, where it's like the layup line, and he's just got to make those. And I think if he does, that can boost the confidence to some of those other throws. So, can he do it? I don't know. But if he does, that might elevate some of the other stuff we see.
BC, despite not tackling as well as they normally do, would you say this is the best tackling defense you've seen in a while, or did the performance this past weekend turn you off from that?
No, it's the best tackling defense we've seen here in a while. Certainly through the Frost era, I think. I know the 21 defense was competitive against some good competition, but I would say of all the flaws on this team, that is not one that I even think about much. And yeah, they're going to miss a play or two, but they've repped it so much, and they've been so physical in practice and taking it to heart. I really think they're probably one of the better tackling teams in the country. I mean, I remember the first week of this season talking to Bronson Schaefer. I was like, geez, I haven't covered a Husker team the first week that looked that fundamentally sound tackling, where there weren't like 3 to 5 plays that were an extra 10 to 15 yards that opening week, because someone swings at air. They've been really solid. So I love that part of this team. And yeah, the defense didn't play their best Saturday, but you also got to be reasonable about it. They were okay. I mean, that's a good crew. And for a first-year scheme, and how many guys they've rotated, and how many young players that are going to come back next year that are a part of it, that's a reason to be really excited. And we can go back to the turnover thing to finish that point off. If they could have that game like Saturday, or a game against Iowa where they do all of that, and then they had like 3 or 4 turnovers, and there's a pick 6 or something like that, that's sort of the bow on top of the present that would be for this defense if they could find it to kind of finish this thing off.
Speaking of Bo, we're probably going back to what, like early Bo Pelini. A little transition there for you. We're probably going back to what, early Bo Pelini, since we've seen a team tackle like this. Is that like 2009, 2010, like somewhere in that range?
I think that's right. I mean, yeah. Maybe all those Bow teams had some gritty guys on defense. I mean, the 2012 had a good run, but then of course they had a disaster. I think I would say 2009, 10. Yeah, I think that's
I'll
the
take
last
it.
time there's been a
Yeah.
defense that's tackled quite like it. And when you said that, I was thinking of Bo Pelini actually sitting on top of the present. Now that would be interesting.
That's what I thought too.
You know,
It wasn't
it
pretty.
creates an interesting visual. You remember those like Lexus commercials where they'd have the bow?
Oh,
on top
yeah.
of the car, just like with Bo
That's just Bo
Pelini, like
Pelini.
sitting cross-legged on top of a car. Be like, Merry
No,
Christmas,
it's Bo
guys.
Pelini on top of an AC unit with Nash Hutmacher leading the
Yeah.
charge in the commercial.
You know, and you mentioned, you know, that 09 and 10 teams, they don't have a Levante David on this team. They don't have a Sue on this team. I'm not
Levante?
even sure they have a Crick on this team, at least not yet. Maybe some of the young guys turn into that, but
I haven't seen any of those last names.
it kind of makes it even more impressive what we've seen from them so far this year.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm talking about tackling specifically as far
Sure,
as
yeah.
Although, you know, it is impressive when you look at the stats after a game, and I know some teams they've played have wanted to be more throw heavy, and that's their strength and whatever. But Nebraska's stopped, 8 teams to 100 yards or less, and I think that matches 2009, and it's almost going to hit what they did in 1999 as far as rushing defense. So some of those things you really got to take stock of and say, man, that's pretty good for a first year. And like you say, you're doing it without necessarily that superstar that you just point to and say, yeah, he just flips a game on its ear all the time. It's been very much a team coordinated effort. And the thing that's exciting about it is, there's freshmen who you can see what can be. Princewell didn't play last week, but we've seen what could be there. Cam Lenhart, guys like that. It makes it kind of exciting about what the defense potentially could be in 24 if guys stick around and all that stuff. We know there's always a long off season in college football, so we'll get to that part when we get to it.
BC, you mentioned some of those guys that didn't play, and that's weirdly not a thing that we've talked about very much on the defensive side of the ball. Like Princewell not being there, I think was a really big deal after the way we saw him play in the last couple weeks before that. Obviously Omar Brown was in protocol. You had Malcolm Hartzog leave the game. You had several major contributors on defense not there. And the fact that we aren't even talking about that as one of the reasons they weren't necessarily quite as sharp as they had been is a little bit crazy, right?
Yeah, that part's been their biggest achievement. It's that especially the defensive line. I spent like 5 months whenever anybody would ask about it saying, well, I like the top 2 or 3 guys, but what about when you get to like guys 4 through 8? And I, just repeating that. And they've answered the bell on all 3 levels really with that. Safety, we could go back to August, like, Miles Farmer leaves. And remember, that was like a story for a couple of days. Like, oh, he was going to be most indispensable Husker, one of the guys you'd think about. He's played all these snaps and stuff like that. When does that topic come up?
I haven't thought about Miles Farmer all year.
Yeah. It's, some things like that. Really? I mean, and then no knock on him personally. I'm just saying, other guys stepped up and you're like, yeah, whatever, and Deshaun Singleton went down and he was playing really good.
Yeah, really well.
And that's a shame because I think he was playing at a pace where he would have reached another level maybe at this point. But nonetheless, Phelan Sanford comes in, does a nice job, and now you got Marquise Buford back. And so they've sort of found ways to like just cover stuff where you're like, oh, that's a little hole. Could that become something? And no, it hasn't really. And now they got to just finish this deal. And that's where I say finish it in style. And Saturday would be the beautiful time to do that. One of those games against an elite quarterback. Both teams got to have it. Both are 5-4. Maryland's in the same boat where if they lose this game, if you look at their schedule, suddenly a bowl game doesn't look that obvious for them, So this is fun. It's like not going to be like one of those national highlight games that everybody's talking about. But as far as the 2 teams involved, it's kind of a big deal. Like this one matters a lot. So this is where the defense has to have their best performance of the year.
BC, let's just end right there with the game against Maryland this weekend. Nebraska needs to do what successfully, like your number one key successfully to get that 6th win this weekend?
I mean, the obvious is we can always say, like, yes, turn the ball over less, please. Like turn it over less once or less. Like we'll give you one, but just stop it at
We'll
one.
give you one.
Yeah, and make
I've
the
been giving
one.
them 2, BC. I said if they can keep it -2 on turnovers, they're fine.
I'm with you. It seems kind of snarky to say it, but it's true.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and make the turnover be at like the 50-yard line where you didn't feel like you gave away a score, or you didn't give them a score, but something like that. But also, speaking of the offense, I think they've got to find at least one play that's just a major explosive in this game which helped them get over the hump. I feel like in those home games previously, the big pass to Malachi and then to Jalen Lloyd. They're going to need something like that where they get that 55-yard play and it's 7 points right there. And then one defensive or special teams, almost a score, something like that basically sets up a score. And I think that's the formula. And if they do those things, I think they can win. I would maybe slightly favor Maryland, I'll be honest. But I think if they can do those, check off those boxes, they could win and just come to play early. And that crowd, it'll be a crowd that's into the game if Nebraska gives them a reason to. It'll get loud in there if that defense is balling. So that's what I'm hoping for, because it'll be a good scene.
It's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate you as always. We will talk to you again next week.
Always enjoy being on, guys. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, BC.
Great stuff there from Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7 on our Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Just a reminder, you can play sports bets in Omaha.
Yeah,
now.
you can.
Andrew knows 6303 Q Street at Horseman's
We're actually
Park.
talking with some Warhorse people today.
We are. Our friends at Warhorse Sportsbook. You can go to the casino in Lincoln or the Horseman's Park in Omaha in person to go place your bets, whether it's pro, college, basketball, baseball, football, whatever. They've got you covered. Go to warhorsecasino.com/sportsbook or get the Warhorse Casino app for details and a full list of house rules. Warhorse Sportsbook, no bets, no glory. Coming up next, Andy Kennedy from KETV.
We will be back